Ethel May Franken, age 33, and her husband Darrell Franken lived with their 3 children at 216 North 10th Street in Aplington, Iowa. Aplington is located about 30 miles from Waterloo with a population of just under 1,000 citizens. The couple had 3 children: 13-year-old Troy, 11-year-old Valerie, and 6-year-old Dustin. The children went to Aplington Parkersburg School, which was just across the street from the family home. Darrell worked at the local John Deere factory in Waterloo, which is approximately 37 miles from Aplington. In early 1983, Ethel had a nervous breakdown and spent several weeks in the psychiatric ward of Allen Memorial Hospital in Waterloo. A nervous breakdown is the loss of the ability to function normally in day-to-day life. The breakdown can last for days, weeks, and in some cases even months. During Ethel's stay at the hospital, she received electroshock therapy as well as other experimental psychiatric treatments. Electroshock therapy is a procedure in which mild electrical currents are sent through the brain, which causes a generalized seizure. The treatment is used to treat mental disorders. Usually around 120 volts are applied externally to the temple of the patient's head. However, only about 1% of the current crosses the skull into the brain. After being released, she appeared to be doing much better. On January 17 in 1983, Ethel made dinner for her family, then left for a women's Christian group dinner. The next day, on January 18, around 4 a.m., Ethel grabbed her .22 caliber handgun, and entered the bedroom she shared with her husband, and shot him to death. Then she entered each of her children's rooms and shot them to death. Once she was sure her family was dead, she turned the gun on herself, committing suicide. On Tuesday, January 19, Darrell's co-worker stopped by to carpool with him to work. His friend knocked, and when nobody answered, he left and went on to work. A little later, a close family friend, Darlene Chabring, dropped by the home to pick up Ethel to take her to a psychiatric appointment in Waterloo. However, she couldn't get anyone to answer the door. When the children also didn't show up for school, people began to suspect something was amiss, so they contacted the local authorities to do a welfare check. Police Chief Tom Lines knocked several times with no answer. He was reluctant to enter. One worried friend decided to use a stepladder to enter through a kitchen window. Once inside, she unlocked the door for others to get in. One friend went ahead further into the home and found a horrific scene. He quickly turned and led the others outside before they could see. When Chief Lines went further into the home, he found Ethel's body on the bed. The gun used in the murders was located next to her lifeless body, along with a very short suicide note. The note briefly described how Ethel feared for her children's futures. Her husband, Darrell, was found about 10 feet away from the bed on the floor. The children were all found in their own bedrooms. All died of gunshot wounds. Chief Lines called in Gerald Shanahan of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation team to investigate the murder-suicide. Gerald Shanahan and his lab crew worked up into the night gathering evidence from the home to try to piece together what transpired. The Butler County Medical Examiner, Dr. Gary Teagland of Petersburg, determined that each family member was shot twice in the chest, with at least one bullet penetrating the heart. Ethel was the only one with a single gunshot wound to the chest. The investigation revealed that Ethel murdered her family, then committed suicide. Investigators believe she was suffering from an underlying mental illness and couldn't cope. Neighbors described the family as good, hard-working people with nice kids. Mrs. Virginia Dean, a friend of Ethel's, said, "Oh man, I talked to her Monday night, and she sounded real good, and looked forward to being home. She put a roast in the oven, and met with her Christian women's group, and she seemed to be enjoying herself again." Mrs. Dean went on to describe how she regularly watched Ethel's children while she was away for treatment at the hospital. She said she was the friend that climbed through the window and unlocked the door when the bodies were found. Friends of the family said Ethel was deeply depressed that her children were not doing well in school, and she feared it was all her fault. Ethel, Darrell, Troy, Valerie and Dustin were all buried at the Pleasant View Cemetery in Applington, Iowa. The little town of Applington was in shock over the killings. In the state of Iowa, just a few years earlier, in 1981, the Gilbert family suffered the same fate. Sheriff deputies thought they were just going to deliver the news to a wife about the suicide of her husband, James Gilbert. However, they were shocked to discover that Bonnie Gilbert and her 5 children were all shot to death. After a thorough investigation, it was discovered that Gilbert was staying with his father 450 miles away in South Dakota. He drove to his family home, murdered his family, then drove back to his father's home where he committed suicide. Gilbert did not leave a suicide note. However, he lost his job several months earlier and one of his children was sick, requiring her to travel back and forth to the hospital often. The children were 13-year-old Dawn, 10-year-old Michelle, 8-year-old Jason, 2-year-old Jean, and 10-month-old Rochelle. No motive was ever established, but teachers at 13-year-old Dawn's school said the girl seemed in fear of her father. William Bauer, age 48, was a civil engineer. He worked in New York as a state inspector of road material. He was a deacon, and a devoted member of the Methodist Church. He religiously gave 10% of all his income to the church. This was evident in his home. Across his fireplace was a large painting of Christ and his disciples. William was married to Florence Alice, age 36. The couple had 2 children, 6-year-old Elizabeth Jane, and 20-month-old Peter David. Bauer's 84-year-old mother, Emma, lived with the family. She was disabled and confined to a bed. The family lived at their home on Sedgefield Drive on Exeter Street, in Parsippany Troy Hills, New Jersey. The couple moved into the home just 4 years earlier after living with Florence's parents for a while. In January of 1956, Bauer began having extreme anxiety. He went to his doctor, who advised him he was working way too much, and needed to take a vacation to alleviate his anxiety. Bauer decided to take his doctor's advice and began planning a vacation for his family. He also made plans for his mother to stay at a nursing home while they were away. Bauer and his wife Florence packed their bags and placed them near the doorway. On January 28 in 1956, neighbors began to worry when they noticed Bauer's car was still backed up to the door. Bauer had planned on leaving the day before, so the neighbor felt something must be wrong. The concerned neighbor decided to check on the family. He opened the front door when nobody would answer his knocks, and found a nightmare. William Bauer had used a pump shotgun and first shot his wife twice as she attempted to flee the home. The gunshots were at close range. He then aimed the gun at his 6-year-old daughter as she sat at the kitchen table eating a sandwich, and shot her. Half of the sandwich was still clenched tightly in her hand. He then shot his 20-month-old son, David, in the hallway. After murdering his wife and 2 children, he made his way to his helpless mother's bedroom, and shot her as she lay in her bed. Florence's parents, Unique and Ida Number, were shot as they entered the home to babysit the children so Bauer could transport his mother to the nursing home. Neighbors were in shock that a respectable man like Bauer could do such a monstrous act. One neighbor said he was the best neighbor he ever had. Others said he was a loving husband and father, and he planned to build a playground for his kids and their playmates in a vacant lot next door in the next few months. Neighbors said Bauer worried about his mother and constantly brought her up in conversations. When authorities investigated the scene, they discovered the car was packed with books to ease the long hours of traveling for the children. Everything pointed to the fact that Bauer was making plans but mentally snapped at some point. Funeral services were held at the First Methodist Church in Parsippany, Troy Hills, New Jersey. Reverend Ernest Walton led the services over the family. Psychiatrists say there are some clear risk factors to snapping. Some of the risks include people with drug or alcohol abuse, tumors, seizures, and a wide range of mental disorders. Even if someone has one or more of the risk factors, it's not certain that person will snap, but there are other warning signs. Dr. Lyle Rossiter, a forensic psychiatrist in St. Charles, Illinois, said, "If a person becomes unusually paranoid or suspicious, or they may even talk about God telling them to kill someone, these are all indicators that a person possibly could do harm to others or themselves." However, Dr. Roland Segal, a forensic psychiatrist in Phoenix, Arizona, said most people with mental illness are not violent. Usually mental health patients are victimized by violent acts more often than they commit the acts themselves. Only 10% of all homicides are actually committed by someone diagnosed with mental illness. However, those statistics may be slightly higher due to someone having mental illness and never being treated. Psychiatrists believe that life experiences can lead up to snapping. When perpetrators of violent crimes are evaluated by psychiatrists, they review life events and personality traits. The perpetrator may have experienced or witnessed abuse or violence in their early childhood. Further studies reveal that brain injury adds to the risk. When the frontal lobe of the brain is damaged, it has been proven to be linked to violent and aggressive behaviors. The frontal lobe regulates emotions, inhibition, and regulates movement. Studies also found that damage to the temporal lobe also adds to the risk for violence. The temporal lobe helps you identify and regulate fear, and how that person reacts to fear. Someone with damage to that key area of the brain may react physically instead of evaluating first. Other indicators of someone snapping is the feeling of hopelessness, feeling ashamed or trapped. People who have these feelings may hint they are unhappy, feel responsible for problems in their family or relationships, and may tell friends or relatives of their feelings and may even tell them they plan to kill themselves or others. When the perpetrator carries out the crimes, they typically dehumanize the person they're killing, or the perpetrator is so preoccupied with their own feelings they stop thinking of the other person's feelings or physical welfare. Dr. Robert Trestman, director of the Center for Correctional Mental Health Services Research at the University of Connecticut Health Center, said, "People snap when their ability to cope is overwhelmed. For some, minor stressors add up." He says for those who cannot cope, one overwhelming event can cause them to snap. Dr. Charles Raison, a psychiatrist and director of the Mind-Body Institute at Emory University, said if the warning signs are strong, a person should be taken immediately to an emergency room. He said most emergency rooms have the capacity to distinguish if someone is a danger to themselves or others. He said you can't hold people forever, but it is the best thing society has at this point. He continued saying even a 48 to 72-hour hold for evaluation may reduce the risk enough if someone has snapped to pull them back from the brink. Ethel Franken was hospitalized for a mental breakdown. On the outside she appeared to be back to normal, but on the inside her fears continued to fester. At some point it became too much and she snapped, killing her entire family, then committed suicide. Could something have been done to stop this tragedy from happening? Maybe she could have been held in the hospital longer. Sadly, innocent lives were lost. William Bauer was diagnosed with extreme anxiety. His doctor recommended taking a vacation to remove some of the stress. However, the day before leaving on vacation he snapped, murdering his wife, children and in-laws. Did Bauer have more than anxiety? Possibly a more complex mental illness. After all, it was just a general physician that diagnosed him with anxiety. Maybe this could have been avoided if Bauer sought treatment from an actual psychiatrist who was trained to deal with patients with mental illness. His doctor should have referred him to a psychiatrist to get proper treatment instead of diagnosing something he's not trained for. May all the victims in both cases rest in peace. That concludes this episode. Keep your eye out for the next volume, coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.
Want to help support the channel you love, and get something in return? Simply purchase some Elizabeth's Chronicles merch. We have coffee mugs, t-shirts, sweatshirts, cozy blankets, beach towels, phone covers and more. Use the coupon code EC10OFF4U and get 10% off your order. The link to order is in the description area below this video. Thanks for helping Elizabeth's Chronicles continue to make the videos you love.